Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is February 26th, 2025, and it is a very special night as we look at the best films of 2024. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your co-hosts for the evening here at my home in Los Angeles, coming to you live with a massive hangover as we partied a little hard after we finished the last film last night. This is our 10th edition of the Top 10 Films show. We've been doing it since 2015, and it's our 445th total video overall, including vlogs, since we started on February 20th, 2015. And that includes 20 videos that came from this, our 2024 season. Both of tonight's co-hosts are doing their first Top 10 show ever, so let's meet them. Our first one has done both the Oscar preview and the Classic Year in Review, so this means he's finally completed the trifecta. He is the bratty son of a Russian oligarch who ran off to the land of Oz, where he plans to go to school to be a renowned architect from the House of Santos. Angelo is here.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
And also with us, new to the show this year, is a recently released ex-con who started a theater program while in prison. Now that he's out, he has met with his hot singing lawyer to come up with a plan to raise his dogs while he takes a strange drug to turn into either Margaret Qualley or Bob Dylan. Ladies and gentlemen, Joey Russo is here.
Hi.
Hi, Joey. All right, now it's time to talk some numbers here. Here is a chart featuring the amount of films watched by each panelist in any given year. If you discount the original members who regularly hit triple digits, the most ever was in 2021, with Matt Polis watching 73 films from that year. The lowest ever is from Max from 2022, who only saw 14 films that year and crafted a top 10 of those 14 films. Hopefully these guys will have beat that. Our list of films comes from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, so we follow their same rules, which this year goes back to exclude films that were released day and date on streaming. And as such, we're back to a similar number of total films that we've seen in the past. For the second year in a row, it's exactly 320 eligible films. The exact same amount, remarkably. And just like last year, there are a number of films that you would think would be eligible, some of which I saw in the theater, that wound up not qualifying for one reason or another. At least one of them, which I won't reveal, would have made my top 10. So let's see what these guys, their numbers are. Angelo, out of 320 films, how many were you able to see?
I watched 68.
So that is now second place all time to Matt Polish. Congratulations on that. Joey, how'd you do?
I have a funny way of revealing this, but I don't like to pull people's chains. So I saw 20% of the 320 Oscar eligible movies. I saw 63 movies.
And so 68 and 63 is really good. Great job, guys. For me, I saw 105 of the 320 films. My third best number overall. Out of that, I saw 64 in the theaters, the most since the lockdown. Between the theater and home rental, I spent $287.40, an average of $2.74 per movie. Not bad if you think about it. And so congratulations, guys. For now, you are in second and third place, respectively, discounting the original members, myself, Jay Money, and Davey. So that's really good.
We should drink to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me to these index cards. I don't know if Angelo remembers this.
Oh, yeah.
From previous shows, but this is where I try and predict their number one films of the year. I've got film names on the back of these cards, and we'll see if I'm going to be right over the course of the evening. The films I select usually are on the person's list somewhere, but only once did I correctly predict their number one film of the year. That was in 2021 when I correctly predicted The Lost Daughter was Matt Polis's number one film of the year. We'll see if I can add another correct prediction this year. Now, as I said earlier, this is the 10th Top 10 show that we've ever done. And we've had 3 reviewers on each of those shows. Every year there's a little crossover between lists. In fact, in the 10 years, there have been 4 films to make all 3 lists. Phantom Thread in 2017, Dune Part 1 in 2021, Banshees of Inisherin in 2022, and Tar also in 2022. We've never had a show, however, that had 30 different films mentioned amidst the 3 lists. That would mean 0 crossover, no films in common. My prediction is that this will be that year. Given our 3 very different aesthetic preferences, I expect very different lists. That's my bold prediction, guys. we will have no crossover.
Statistically, that's nearly impossible.
Exactly, yeah.
If there was ever a year that there wasn't going to be crossover, it feels like this would be a year. So that brings us up to biggest movie missed, which means if you guys could watch one more movie, what would it be? And Joey, let's start with you.
I have a ranked watch list. This is easy for me just to go to number one, Thelma. It looks so funny. I've heard so many good things about it.
Thelma for him. Angelo.
I'm gonna say Madam Web because I heard how bad it is. I just wanted to see how bad it is, but I didn't want to make that one of my films.
If he had one more day, he watched the bad films or what he thought was a bad film. I saw both of those films, and so we'll see if either of them make my top 10 tonight. For me, the day that blew up, the new Looney Tunes movie is not even available to the public next month, so I obviously missed one, but if I could, I looked for it everywhere. In terms of things that are available, The Young Woman in the Sea. I thought about getting Disney Plus to see it, but I don't have that kind of money, so that would be my choice based on what's available. Now it's time for my annual disclaimer. Every year, I remind you folks that I march to the beat of my own drummer, and proudly so. But believe me, I and Angelo and Joey know how difficult it is to make a film. And all of these filmmakers, or most anyway, should be proud of even finishing a piece of art and getting it to market. That's a major accomplishment. But once it's out there, it doesn't belong to them anymore. It's a piece of work that affects me in different ways, and part of the fun of movie watching is sharing how it affected you or didn't with others. The important thing to both you as an audience and these guys as my co-host is not to take anything too personally, and I will do the same. And I do think it's our responsibility to the audience to share dissenting opinions if there are any. This is also the part of the show where I often say that I was not happy with the overall crop of films in the year. However, that's not the case for me in 2024. I think this actually might be the best year in film since we started the show. On the whole, that doesn't include the Oscar nominees, but amongst the 105 films that I watched, I liked or appreciated a lot more than usual. There was still only a handful of films that I truly loved, but I was really pleased with the year overall. And with those films I loved, it was often about emotional engagement. And that became the tiebreaker when deciding what films make the list this year. Political relevance or importance of message is of no consequence to me. It's about how did it make me feel and what did the filmmakers do to make me feel that way. So that's my annual disclaimer. So without getting into any specific films, do you guys have anything you want to say before we get down to the actual list? Angelo?
Yeah, so looking over my top 10, I feel like a lot of my top 10 hit more, I think, on a personal level. More years than others, I think.
But no movie-related disclaimers.
All right, so now the moment is upon us. The time has come. It's time to start, as we always do, with number 10. Our number 10 favorite film of 2024. Angelo?
I have a documentary. It's Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. We're going to go personal again here. So about a year ago, I lost a very close, my cousin, to ALS. So I saw him go from like an able-bodied person. Different scenario than Christopher Reeve, but I saw his body deteriorate into a wheelchair. And so that reliving the whole Christopher Reeve story. And then, of course, there are parts that I never knew about him, right? Yes, he's not Superman, but he sort of was. To a lot of people, I didn't know also like how he was so imperative in like the disability acts from the 90s, right? That kind of had brought the public's sort of understanding of people living with a disability. So I really appreciated that story. I kind of appreciated the juxtapositions of, his Superman and then his other acting and then the real life, with his kids and his wife and the mother of his first kids. So yeah, I was crying with the whole time, by the way, also.
I watched this yesterday, actually. This was part of the pack of the final 5 that I watched. And I was a mess, and I do have it in my top 5 documentaries of the year. The narrative itself has tragedy, inspiration, sadness, and hope. I could have done without the animation during portions of it, but that feels like the only flights of fancy. Otherwise, it was just the right balance of archival footage and interviews, the tried and true approach that's still effective without any additional bells and whistles. When we talk about documentaries, we often talk about form is more important than content. They're making a documentary. It's probably an important story for one reason or another. It's about how you tell it. And I think this did a really good job. It's obviously emotional, thought-provoking without losing its dignity or intelligence. It feels to me like a film where the filmmakers achieved all of their goals. Joey, Superman.
Didn't see it. Just added it to my watch list, though. I mean, you guys make a pretty compelling case for emotionality. I'm looking forward to watching it.
Angela, any rebuttal?
Nope, no rebuttal, but you should watch it, Joey, and bring some Kleenex.
Making his debut in a finale show, Joey, his first film, number 10 film of 2024.
My number 10 is Nickel Boys. Just the way it's shot, first-person perspective, is very effective, very compelling visually. It's not a story that I've heard before.
I did not respond well to Nickel Boys at all. I know it's an important subject and an important topic, and so many films that have racial themes are about the results of systemic racism, but the more interesting films and stories make more of an effort to understand the causes. The rest is just highlighting the victimization, which is important not to forget, but I'm not sure they make better stories. And in this case, my chief complaint is about the thing that you seem to like most about it, what I feel like is a gimmick in terms of the choice to shoot POV, as if it invented that, as if there were no films like Diving Bell and Butterfly or Lady of the Lake before that. This groundbreaking choice, which is not really all that groundbreaking. I understand the academic reasons for the choice, but it functions as more of a distraction than an assistance. And to make matters worse, Ramel Ross, the director, strays from the choice at times with these extreme close-ups that don't work within the rules that he sets up for himself. I also found that the bold choice hindered the actors' performances, creating an odd self-consciousness to every moment. They weren't able to act with anyone really ever, and even the most trained of thespians in the piece floundered under the extreme circumstances. I would admit that there are some images that are next level breathtaking, great cinematic individual moments that most directors could only dream of, but that is not enough. I do understand that these stories need to be told. It's about not repeating the heinous treacheries of the past, made more relevant in these baffling, regressive times. But my personal feeling is they need to be told differently. Sure, the horrors and emotion will have an immediate visceral impact, but that's about the history and not the film itself. Form, not content. It was a big, bold swing that to me resulted in nothing more than a cheap single, if you pardon the baseball metaphor. Singles are still good, but it's not what it could have been if they'd hit the ball squarely on the barrel of the bat. Angelo, Nickel Boys, this seems like your kind of film as well.
Haha! I actually agree with you, Jonathan, where so I really like the story. I think if there was a redeeming quality, it was the story, and the right word is distracting for me also, JB, with like the POV. Because also like I didn't know, like it started with one character and then the POV went to another character, and then it went back and forth, and it was kind of confused, like who's talking.
And not only did that, it's a fine idea, but they did it late. Like it was like 45 minutes in before they made that switch, and I'm like, it's too late for that. You need to establish this earlier.
Yeah.
Joey, rebuttal.
Well, so there are other first-person perspective movies. Like this is the first one that I've seen. I thought it was effective. It affected me, but I don't have as much or any experience with that first-person perspective. Maybe because of the first-person perspective, I was like going through it. It was like a dream or like.
It's a tool in the toolbox, but rarely do films like go all the way with it. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And he made this decision, and then he breaks from it within scenes in a way that I found distracting as well. All right, so that'll bring me to my number 10. And Angelo and I are having a little bit of agreement this evening in the sense that I also have a documentary as my number 10 film of the year, but not the same one. I didn't have any documentaries on my top 10 last year, so this is the first one since Navalny in 2021, and only the fifth doc to appear on any of my 10 top 10 lists. I was swept away by the honest, personal film, Will and Harper. I found it quite lovely and frankly hopeful in that most of the people they meet along the way are accepting and supportive in a way that Harper didn't expect. It's only when people are able to hide behind the anonymity of social media do the mean-spirited haters come out, which is also quite telling. This film is not just about trans rights and self-expression, but also a testament to friendship in a way that many films fail to capture. It reflects the complications of modern-day friendship, which is often only about occasional connections, and even those are usually virtual, which aren't quite the same. And even the courage to be truly vulnerable and honest with those that we care about. We have to make that extra effort to connect now, perhaps more so than in the past because of all the digital distractions that flood our world. As emotional as the film is, it is also very fun. With that said, the conversation they have is spread out across several days and states in a way that is clearly contrived. It doesn't evolve organically. I recognize that the alternative would be to shoot them constantly in every moment in order to capture them more realistically. And it's possible they would have been done the movie in an hour instead of and that would have made the road trip moot. They basically would get in a car and he's like, okay, this is the thing I've got to ask you today. It didn't feel like they had scripted answers, but it felt like they had scripted questions. It's not practical to do it my way, but the forced quality of the conversation added a level of artifice to a format that I think should feature less of that. I acknowledge, though, it didn't take away from the overall impact. Otherwise, a terrific idea and some really nice work. I've got Will and Harper. Angelo.
I'm glad you said that. I may change my answer to the question of what film I would go back and watch, because I missed that.
Joey, Will and Harper.
Yeah, I saw it. I ranked every of the 63 movies I saw, so I don't know if it's a valuable data point to have for any movie that comes up. It's 55 out of 63 for me.
That's pretty
not
low.
high. Like, I think it's great for people who are already fine with trans people to watch. It just felt like kind of pointless. Like, I wish this could sway people to be like, oh, look, like Harper is a person just like me. But like, I don't think anyone who doesn't already think that is going to watch this and come away with that.
Well, I think you're putting a lot of pressure on one movie. No one movie is going to do that. But I do think it's about normalizing those parties feel like is not. More trans faces on screen, slowly loosening the lid on that. It's not really about changing the minds of people that have already made up their minds. It's about younger generations that are still sort of in flux. And so I do think it has the potential to be effective in the long term, the way that like 80s and 90s movies might have affected our ideologies. Slowly but surely, these things do have an impact. It affected me emotionally, personally, and I feel like a film's got to be doing something right in order to achieve that.
I totally agree with the first point of like visibility, and just like the more movies that are made, with trans people, then that becomes part of the zeitgeist. Very well said. I got nothing. That's great.
So we got our number 10s out of the way. Now it's time, obviously, to move to number 9, and let's see who goes first. It is time for Joey to go first. Joey, your number 9 film of 2024.
My number 9 film is The Bike Riders. Big fan of performances in this movie. I thought Austin Butler and Tom Hardy. I, once upon a time, had a motorcycle. And so, we talk about personal connections we have to the movies on our list. And that was something that drew me to it. Interesting underworld to be let into through this movie. I was really immersed watching it. Oh, God.
So, yeah, I hate Bike Riders.
Jesus
I hated the Bike Riders so much. Probably 100 out of 105. Just reading my notes. As I suspected from the trailer, it's pretty much a Sons of Anarchy prequel. Less derivative than likely Kurt Sutter and company used the same source material as part of their research. Still, a lot of poor performances and a highly questionable structure make this film mostly unwatchable. It's no surprise to me that Tom Hardy hides behind a terrible accent and calls it a performance, but the fact that Jodie Comer does the same is a surprising travesty. Both of them feel put on and inherently false. Austin Butler is another actor I've been impressed by in the last few years, but this script only provides him with a flat character, an object for the other two in their strange triangle. There is some interesting writing now and then, worthwhile moments, often undercut by the two-dimensional acting. That's my perspective. There is a presumed love or fascination with the source material that seemed to prevent any real thematic exploration that the distance of time should provide the proper perspective for. I feel like there needed to be a depiction of the lack of family or community for a lot of these characters that the Bike Club was the answer to. It seemed like it needed to be about that brotherhood that they were so obsessed by, but not just showing it, but understanding the why. Why did they need the brotherhood? What brought them there? What drove them initially to create that fatal rule that one could never leave the club? That doesn't make sense. There was something more to this club than just the rush of riding bikes. There was security and eventually power, but the desperate need to cover so many narrative elements precluded them from really digging into that in any satisfying or interesting way. Before we let Joey rebut, Angelo, we've got very divided opinions on the Bike Riders here.
Yeah, I'm in the middle here because I thought it was watchable. I watched it. It was great. I would say great. It was good. Did like the story because I did not know anything about the story. But, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it like you did, Jeff.
So that's somewhere in the 30s for him, it sounds like. Joey, I had a lot to say, but it's a hard disagree on the performances.
Golly, I kind of hope this is the widest disparity we have. That's tough to stomach because you're well articulated. I can't fault anything. A lot of what you're saying is opinions. Like if you don't believe the performances. I like the viewing experience. Can't rebut your points though.
And Vibes is fine. Like, it's totally valid, and that's the beauty of it. And Angelo's right in the middle, so people watch this show, they're going to want to watch the bike riders to see which of the three of us they most align with.
What this film brought for me was the aspect of family. The writers were a family to each other. They became a family to each other, right?
But why did they need that family? Like, what was it about their lives that was so empty? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I felt like was missing.
Okay, yeah.
I apologize for the strength of my verbiage, but I did feel passionately in the other direction. All right, it's time for Angelo's number 9.
So, good segue from your number 10, Jonathan. My number 9 is Saturday Night. I was excited about this only because I used to be an NBC page. I worked in that studio. I did not know anything about that first night, even if this is maybe partly fictionalized. I loved everything of the adrenaline, the rush, that kind of part. It just took me back to that time when I used to work there, but then also took me into another world of like, oh, this is the 70s and crazy characters, crazy actors. And
Joey, Saturday Night.
It's not giving anything away because it's out of my top 10, but it's my number 11. Very close. I liked it a lot. I liked the pace of it. Kept me engaged. Yeah, I was a big fan of a Saturday Night.
My number 9 is also about an iconic behind-the-scenes television event of the 70s. Last year, my number 9 film was called May December. In keeping with the theme of months in titles, September 5 happened to fall into my number 9 slot this year. I've been fascinated by the attack on the Munich Olympics for a good portion of my life, and this film offered a different but still captivating perspective on the events. It had a little of everything: tension, humor, balance of plot and character, and relevant questions relating to the morality of the media. Director Tim Feldbaum and his team took time to dig into the specific details of how things worked and didn't slow themselves down by explaining them to us. Instead, they dared us to keep up in a way that was truly thrilling and highly engaging. The cast is top-notch, led by a stellar turn by John Magaro. He doesn't have the grand speech that awards-worthy performances often do, but he has a ton of small, detailed moments that help his character to feel all the more real and expressive. The script is so wonderfully dense, filled with jargon, but not forgetting the moments. It's really smart work all the way around. It doesn't have a ton of answers to the questions it posed. It certainly wants to promote truth over ratings, confirmations over guesses, but we remain unsure about what is okay to broadcast and what isn't. Does the multitude of cameras bring us closer together or further apart? The film is really accomplished and consistently interesting without losing the tone it's set from the beginning or the limited perspective of the news team. The temptation to cut away from the control room was likely very high, but avoiding it made it a better movie. Joey, I've got September 5 as my number 9.
On my ranked watch list, this is like number 20 or so out of 40. Like I have a lot of movies I wanted to see. I wanted to see this and I didn't get around to it.
Angelo, September 5.
I agree with you. A lot of those points I loved that you said there's this temptation to go outside of the control room. So part of me, what I loved about this movie is being in the control room. I liked how the director and the filmmakers handled it, where, like you said, they kept it contained. John Magaro, yeah, I just want to see more of him.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of agreement, so there's no rebuttal, and Joey didn't see it. So we're going to move right along here, keep things moving to our number 8. There's no way these guys have seen my number 8 film, but we'll get to that in a second. In the meantime, it's time for Angelo, your number 8.
My number 8 is Mike Leigh's Hard Truths. And while I usually don't like scripts where the character sort of doesn't go anywhere, I made an exception here based on the performance of Marianne Jean-Baptiste. The title resounds with me because it is a hard truth to kind of look at yourself, especially if you're an unhappy person, kind of question why are you unhappy. I just feel like there's a lot of people like that out there that don't know why they're not happy. This movie explored that, but it also like how it kind of affects the people around her family, her husband, her son, her sister, especially, who's the totally opposite of her. Didn't really answer why the lead character was unhappy, and usually I would not like that, but I liked it a lot here.
Full disclosure, I have worked with Marianne Jean-Baptiste all the way back in 2000. Tremendous person, a tremendous actor. Just in the last couple days, she got knocked off my top 5 actresses of the year. It is an excellent performance, and I'm, generally speaking, historically, a huge Mike Leigh fan. Life is Sweet is a film that I teach, but this film, for whatever reason, did not work as well for me. And the thing about improv is it's so hit or miss. The individual performance was fine, but I found a lot of the scenes repetitive and over the top. From a writing point of view, the shot choices weren't as strong as Leigh usually makes or fluid. This felt like a misstep from a master filmmaker to me, I'm surprised that I did not respond to Hard Truths. Joey,
It's 37, so like middling. The thing that took me out of it the most was something you mentioned right out the gate, Angelo, which is the main character doesn't really have much of an arc. By the end of it, just like worn down by this person. I know that that's maybe what they're trying to show. This character is putting themselves through this, seeing the world through that lens. It's not without basis or anything, but I worn down, I think, but I liked it. I did enjoy watching it.
I felt like they needed to pull it back a little bit. Like they take this idea to such extremes that it starts to be disingenuous. And that's where I push back on the piece. It's probably middle of the road for me, but closer in the 50s, or something like that. Like it's certainly not one of the worst films. And Mike Leigh's always, at least somewhat interesting. By comparison to his own work, it feels like a miss. But Angelo, a rebuttal.
No, I don't have a rebuttal. It kind of great. It's not my favorite Mike Leigh work either, but I enjoyed it this year.
All right, Joey, you're number 8.
My number 8 is Kinds of Kindness. I'm ready to get torn apart by you, Jonathan, on this one, because I think I know that you don't love Yorgos Lanthimos.
I sent you guys a list of all the films that I watched, and so because, to your point, I don't like Yorgos Lanthimos, I opted out. I refuse to watch, so I have nothing to say. Angelo, Kinds of Kindness.
I didn't know you didn't like Yorgos. I didn't realize I'm not the only one. Kinds of Kindness, I think because it's 3 films in one, it was a better experience for me. I think out of the 3, the first one was my least favorite.
I like the form, and maybe it's just, that's at least a mini theme for me, is 2 out of the 3 movies I've said so far have like some unique stylistic choice. So the 3 movies in one is like, oh, it's cool. I like the vibes of Yorgos movies. I don't love that he loves injuring animals, and this movie is no exception.
And so you're a Yorgos fan traditionally, it sounds like.
Yes, I am.
More reasons why there's going to be disconnect on today's show. A lot of you are just proving my point. The next film is a film that no one would have ever predicted would be on my top 10, and there's no way these guys even bothered to look at it. There have been multiple years where those niche-sploitation films, as I call them, I've named them as the worst film of the year. And when I say niche-sploitation, I mean these action films that star Liam Neeson. Generally, they are quick cash grabs built for the international market. I expected more of the same from In the Land of Saints and Sinners, but that turned out not to be the case, as Neeson returns to his roots, both literally and figuratively. There is still action, but he actually plays his own age, with only a moderate set of skills. The story is actually really good, and that's enough to carry this movie. It's not fresh or new. It's got all the tried and true tropes of the piss and vinegar of revenge and redemption. In that sense, it's an old-fashioned Irish yarn that's part of a grand tradition of the country's own love-hate inner conflict with its underground IRA. Like many terrorist organizations, they have good intentions or motives, but it's their methods that the populace doesn't approve of. And the IRA thinks the populace is too weak to fight for what they really want and deserve. That decades-old political struggle is really only the backdrop for this tapestry of violence. It's as if the aforementioned methods harden them to the point where they lost that buffer of conscience. And when they are wronged in ways that have nothing to do with the good of the country, they have no ability to make that distinction. You're either with the IRA or against them. Most of this comes out in the tremendous performance of Kerry Condon. Her maniacal dedication to her brother is deeply felt, and as she portrays it, it's almost as if it goes beyond most fraternal relationships in a way that suggests a cycle of abuse that may have created the monster that she's become. And the IRA is merely an outlet for her violent tendencies. All that is in the subtext, which is a credit to director Robert Lorenz, whose work I have not admired previously. He effectively told his mildly unoriginal story in a way that kept me captivated. And believe it or not, even Liam Neeson isn't awful. He doesn't laughably distract like he does in some of those other films. But Finbar's complicated backstory needs to be a little more worn on him. That's just some small bumps on a familiar, well-worn, but still pleasant road. Probably my biggest surprise of the year, In the Land of Saints and Sinners. Joey, there's no way you saw this movie.
You're right. There's no way I've seen it.
Angelo.
Okay, I saw half of it. I fell asleep. And it wasn't because of the story. I think I was tired because I was engaged. I'm glad it's on your top 10 list. It's going to make me go watch it again. I'm not sure we're going to be doing an Oscar preview this year, so I can now say that Kerry Condon is my top supporting actress performance of the year. She's that good. All right, guys, perfect. 10, 9, and 8 are done, and any kid can tell you after that comes number 7. It's time for our 7 favorite films of 2024. Joey gets to go first. What's your number 7 film?
My number 7 is Fall Guy. I loved the experience of watching this movie. I saw it in the theaters, as one should see a nice big action movie. I was totally taken by the romance. Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt had incredible chemistry. God, such a fun movie. Is it high art? Probably not. It's got to be the most fun movie going experience in my head of the year.
I should have known better than to doubt David Leitch, who continues to deliver smart, entertaining action films like this one. Some of them even have depth, which this one doesn't quite deliver on, but it is almost endless fun. And definitely one of the most fun I've had at a movie theater this year. Successful pop entertainment at its best. Thematically, it's most successful as an ode to the stunt community, which is personal for its director because he used to be a part of that group. That love is abundantly clear without really interrupting the narrative. I thought there was an opportunity to dig into the PTSD Colt experienced. After all, it was the main obstacle to the film's primary relationship. That element is a footnote to the razzle-dazzle of the stunt spectacular. The two leads are at their charming best, and they practically carry the movie in spite of the overacting of the supporting characters and the villains. Each set piece is as clever and funny as the one before it. They're all worthwhile. I was initially put off by the voiceover, but it doesn't last throughout the film, and once he arrives in Australia, I'm hooked in. It's not remotely rooted in verisimilitude and was never intended to be. With that said, the script is taut, perfectly structured, minus the aforementioned voiceover, which I personally still think was unnecessary, even though it wasn't egregious. Its details, plans, and callbacks are wonderfully embedded into the ride of the story. All red herrings nicely established without calling attention to themselves. It's deceptively difficult work and marvelously handled. And of course, David Leitch is in his element, both with the action and the humor. It's the kind of movie that made us fall in love with movies. It's hardly a brain teaser, but it's pleasing to all the senses. Nonetheless, it is not going to make my top 10. However, it is my number 3 best adapted screenplay of 2024. So I did appreciate it. I think the script is the strength. Obviously, the action. There's a lot going on. It'd probably be a top 20 because it's hollow ultimately. And that's why. Because if a movie combines entertainment value with depth and meaning, that's the gold standard to me. Angelo, Fall Guy.
So I think the only regret with the Fall Guy for me was not watching it in the movie theater, which I wanted to do. So I didn't get that experience you guys did. I did watch it at home. I thought it was fun, like you said. I mean, Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling were great together. The action was great.
If I was going to predict, like, maybe there's an overlap with you and me, at least, for some reason, I had a gut feeling that maybe it could be Fall Guy. I'm very confident that we won't have any overlap going forward. So, yeah.
So it's time for Angelo's number 7 film of 2024.
First overlap, JB. September 5 is my number 7 pick.
We did not break the record. We will have less than 30 total films mentioned within the top 10. So, Angelo, cheers to you for having some overlap with me. I talked a lot about it. Do you have more to say about it, or do you shoot your wad and when I talked about it?
I pretty much talked about it.
And that's one you did not see, right, Joey?
That's correct.
Then we can move right on to my number 7. Consider September 5 asked and answered, if you will. That's been discussed. You know, it's interesting because Joey's number 7 was a very fun film. And my number 7 is also what I consider to be a fun film, but has the depth that I felt like was missing from Fall Guy, which I will explain. My number 7 film last year was an animated film called Elemental. And once again, as chance would have it, I'm going animated here again at number 7. The 10-year-old deep inside of me was thrilled to experience just how good Transformers 1 was. For all the vitriol I have for the Michael Bay live-action films and their disassociation with the Transformers canon, I'm overjoyed to report that this animated prequel gets us back on track. More importantly, it's fun, smart, exciting, and meaningful. All the things. I was initially reluctant, borderline dismissive of the trailer. The mere suggestion of Prime and Megatron as besties hurt my teeth. But they made it work, and what's more, D16's descent into rage-fueled madness is believable with real-world parallels. It also suggests the destruction of corruption, the pain of classism, the potential and importance of activism, and the complex burden of leadership. More than meets the eye, right? The script is sharp with great dialogue and characterizations and a story befitting the franchise's legacy. Director Josh Cooley and his team also included a plethora of Easter eggs and a complete disregard for the messes of the live-action period, aka the dark era, in a way that should be pleasing to the diehard fans without alienating potential new ones. The world is thorough, detailed, and ultimately recognizable if you could give it a chance to allow it to unfold. A post-credit sequence suggests a future for this reinvented, reinvigorated IP, which this film wholeheartedly earns. I, for one, felt like a kid again, but so did everyone I saw it with, who were not as familiar with all the minute details of the backstory. It takes a special movie to pull that off, and to me, that's exactly what Transformers 1 is. Angelo, Transformers 1.
I'm shocked that's in your top 10. I loved it too. It's not in my top 10, but I'm on the ball with you where it kind of, I knew it wasn't going to be a Michael Bay movie, thank God, but I liked, I did like kind of like the backstory that they created between Optimus Prime and Megatron. I thought it was a fun movie also. I watched it with my nephews and my sister. Shockingly, she wanted to watch it. I was pleasantly surprised how good it was.
Yeah, and that's sort of how I feel about it. But, like I was saying earlier, it's got that fun and it's got a tight script, but it's also got those other themes. Joey's a little younger, so maybe he doesn't have that same sort of nostalgic appeal. Joey, Transformers 1.
Have not seen it. I haven't seen any of the Transformers movies. That Transformers doesn't do it for me.
So we had our first overlap here at 7. So we'll see if we get any more as the evening goes along. Time for number 6. And let's see who goes to go first. It is Mr. Joey, your number 6 film of 2024.
My number 6 is The Substance. What that movie becomes is something that's so singular, so unique to me, especially, in this movie year, like you're not going to see anything quite like that. I was engrossed. I really enjoyed it.
If I did rank it, it'd probably be 104 out of 105. I really, 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 really hated this movie. And to the point where literally I could not watch. I had to avert my eyes many, many times. Not that I missed the themes. I just felt like the grotesquerie that it created went too far. They crossed the line and never went back. And it felt like it was crossing a line for the sake of crossing a line, for the sake of pushing an envelope. The thematic exploration is important, but I don't think the places that it went furthered that. It maybe got at some clickbait kind of thing, got people talking about it. But, as a singular narrative, I found it repulsive. I found the filmmaking to be unanastic. It was an awful experience for me. This is another one that I feel like I thought might be an Angelo movie.
I was a little disappointed with The Substance. I just watched it last week also. I got into it in the beginning. I thoroughly enjoyed the story, but I think probably, Joey, what you liked about it, I didn't like it towards the end with the whole monster thing. For me,
it felt like a direct reference to Brian De Palma.
Okay.
Like whether it be Carrie or Phantom of the Paradise, Dress to Kill, like there was a lot of the De Palma influence. And all those De Palma films I don't necessarily love. Another reason for the vitriol there. But
they went overboard with the horror at the end because I could understand what they're trying to go for in terms of the disfigurement, I guess, of it all. Because I kind of was thinking about The Fly when I watched it. I thought Demi Moore was great, but yeah, I think I was just disappointed with The Substance.
But I do disagree about Demi Moore. And she's an Oscar frontrunner right now, and I feel like that's more because the story. It's the Brendan Fraser Award now. I don't think it's a great performance. I don't think there's a lot going on there. All the choices, like the fisheye lenses, everything is over the top in a way that I found distasteful. Before I let Joey rebut, I did want to take the time to do this, since it has now been moot. It has been made moot.
You thought that'd be my number 1?
I thought that was going to be your number 1.
Wow.
You don't know me at all.
I guess not.
You don't know me.
I don't know you. You don't have to leave. Joey, rebuttal on The Substance.
I mean, like you said, these are opinions. A movie like The Substance, I feel like, is mostly a relatable, human story of a woman dealing with being in an entertainment industry when she's aging, and that then adds as a layer this cool, beautiful body horror thing. It does take it, one would reasonably say, too far. Where that goes is has connective tissue to a real person's lived experience.
I disagree with the idea that it's somewhat close to this world. I think it is intentionally, far removed. I think it had this point to make, which is a valid point about body positivity and objectification of women. A lot of films that I disliked this year were about, I like the message, I don't like the messenger, if you will, the way it was delivered. I feel like the message gets diluted to me when you're making all these things over the top, and essentially what I feel is condescended to. Something that's a little more subtle and subtextual than the things that I would respond to. Rebuttal to the rebuttal, Joey?
No.
It looks like I don't have Angelo's number 6 yet, so it's time.
My number 6 film is, I'm going to my Catholic roots, and I'm going with Conclave at number 6. The vibe of being in the room of all these priests so intriguing to me, and a good film drama about people, society, the church. To cherry on top is Ray Fiennes. He keeps doing it for me. He's just bringing it. Even with his characters, like I didn't know what his intentions were. I like that kind of dichotomy in his character and the way he portrayed it as well. I like the direction also. Edward Berger.
I have a lot written on Conclave. I'll try and be brief with it because for 75% of the movie, maybe more, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my number one film of 2024. Like I was so riveted. And then to me, it falls off a cliff in a way that in an effort to what felt like it was trying to be salacious almost. Like it started to get funny. And it seemed like a choice to make things funny. And I don't know for sure if it's intentionally funny, but if it's not, Edward Berger, who to your point displayed great direction, such detailed, exquisite, careful direction throughout the film, would he suddenly make a choice that would make people laugh awkwardly? The last, even to like 15, 20 minutes, hurt it for me, like, to the point where it felt disingenuous. But I was so invested throughout most of it. It did wind up at number 11 on my year because so much of it is so good. Just from a filmmaking point of view, Edward Berger's in my top 5 directors. Ray Fiennes is my number 1 male performance of 2024 because
Yes.
It is a near perfect performance. It is so
I agree.
delicate. He's unlikely to win the Oscar, but he definitely should in my mind. It is some extraordinary work, a film that has so many extraordinary moments. I love so much of it. I felt like I needed to love all of it to put it on the top 10. So I eventually knocked it off. But even as of this morning, I was thinking about it. Joey, Conclave.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I also really enjoyed Ray Fiennes' performance.
Angelo, any rebuttals?
No rebuttals. I'm glad you guys liked it.
All right, so it is time for my number 6. And the Indian indie, Girls Will Be Girls, will be the final film on my list that I did not see in the theater. It feels a little more honest and grounded than many of the coming-of-age sexual awakening films, perhaps accentuated by the continued repression within Indian culture. It seems to have raised the stakes and added to the sense of rebellion. Mira's curiosity is enhanced by the forbidden nature of it all, but also by a very modern awareness that their situation is unique. Increased globalization allows her to realize sexuality isn't as big a deal to the rest of the world. A lot of the film's success is owed to the film's 2 primary performances. The young Preeti Panigrahi is extremely expressive. Her wants, needs, jealousies, ambitions, rage, and frustration are all crystal clear and almost always subtle, detailed, nuanced, and organic. Kani Kushruti is probably an even more difficult part as the mother. Her character's conflict of needing to sternly manage her daughter's attraction to this boy while also trying to navigate her own, stemming from a seemingly cold marital situation. Director Suchi Talati relies on her to portray all that without addressing it directly in the dialogue. It's beautiful cinematic work. The direction is never flashy or showy, but presents a naturalistic blocking that elegantly lands on frames with depth and meaning. It does get a little heavy-handed at times in that the men don't fare well at all. The boys at school, in particular, are a little too much. The point, I believe, was to suggest that women are all that they have, that they need to be there for each other instead of against each other. It's a valid point of view. I just wish it didn't need to push it to the extreme in order to achieve that goal. Luckily, the scene work and performances are terrific enough to overcome that. Angelo, I don't suppose you watched Girls Will Be Girls.
I did not. I have not.
Joey, Girls Will Be Girls?
Didn't see it. Sorry, it's on my watch list. Didn't get to it.
So they have failed. No, I'm just kidding. But it does mean we get to move straight on, and we're already up there, guys. It's our top 5 films of 2024, the Big 5. And as I already indicated, my 5 are all films I've seen in the theater. Angelo, you're first. Your number 5 film, 2024.
My number 5 film is an animated film from 2024 that I was not expecting to love as much, but I did. It is The Wild Robot. I was just surprised how touched I was by the story. I guess what I liked about it was the family aspect of the story in terms of not only her being sort of the mother figure, but also how the animals came together. They're all predators, and yet they were all able to come together just to survive, really. You may have I don't want to say a defect, but something that's holding you back. Overcoming that to reach literally the highest of heights and flying into the world.
I did like the film. I felt it was incredibly sweet, but almost shamefully emotional, and ultimately naive in a way that didn't quite sit well with me. It's more of a plot or theme issue than anything. The performances and the animation is strong across the board. But it's the third act that felt disingenuous, especially compared to the rest of the film. It's as if it suddenly remembered its younger target audience and desperately tried to course correct. Its hope for unity is noble, but felt dramatically unrealistic. Here we have another utopian vision that seems childishly oblivious to human nature. The counter-argument is, of course, that this film is not dealing with humans, but first, they are anthropomorphized enough, and secondly, its metaphorical intentions are obvious. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the animals are instinctual creatures and far less likely to succumb to the arrangements that the film suggests. It always would seem cheesy as a conclusion, but perhaps it felt more so because of the rest of the film was so grounded and honest in a way that I really liked. Like Conclave, it was heading towards a top 10 slot, but then that last act sort of let me down. The good news is that this one is mostly good, but then took a sharp turn that felt like a different movie to me in a disappointing way. Joey?
I also thought it was very emotional. Like, like when you eat something and it's like cloyingly sweet. I feel like I have PTSD from watching this movie. I was like sobbing. It's kind of a drawback of the movie when it like knows what it's doing and it's just leaning into that.
The suggestion was it's slightly manipulative in that way?
Yeah. The awareness that like this movie is kind of doing that. It was the most emotional experience seeing a movie for me this year. I'll say that.
Angelo, Joey's not in control of his emotions.
Yeah.
You have any rebuttal?
Well, basically, the reason exactly why Joey loved it is the reason why I loved it too. It's like my emotions were probably manipulated, and I didn't catch that. So good job.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to Joey's number 5 film of 2024.
Okay, my number 5 is A Real Pain. I saw so much of myself in both characters. It resonated with me. The performances were enjoyable. I thought Kieran Culkin's character was like a little annoying, and obviously he's supposed to be, but like maybe to a fault. It got to be a little much.
There's a lot of things I did like about it. I did like the structure of it, and it's a mostly net positive. I didn't hate the movie as much as, like there's other films that we've talked about that I really disliked. Certainly a mediocre middle, and it is sort of Kieran Culkin. I do feel like they had ideas about manic depressiveness. They had thoughts, but it never felt real to me. And I think part of that has to do with, because it's from Jesse Eisenberg's character's perspective, we don't see the transitions as much. And even just seeing a transition once would make a huge difference in this movie. It's not very cinematic. It is maybe overly verbose at times. Like, it felt like play-like in that regard, like theatrical. There's some positives, there's some negatives. I'm sort of middle of the ground on this particular piece. I'm disappointed that Kieran Culkin's going to win the Oscar, but Angelo...
I thought it was good. I don't think it was great. I'm kind of on the same fence as you. Kieran Culkin actually brought the film down for me. I mean, other than that, I like the story, I like the screenplay. Kieran Culkin's performance, it didn't do it for me. And so
he's a dynamic character, but it feels like dynamism for the sake of sometimes in certain moments. All right, Joey, rebuttal.
I mean, the thing that seems like it took you guys out of the movie is the thing that also took me out of the movie. I have no rebuttal.
So it becomes about degrees. Like, it took you out less, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you noticed it, but you were invested enough in the other things. You saw yourself. For me, it didn't move the needle emotionally or cerebrally. All right, so it's time for my number 5. And, Angela, I have had one overlap so far. It was September 5. Which was behind-the-scenes look at an iconic night in 70s television. The same could be said about my number 5 film, as I insinuated earlier, because it is our second overlap, as I have Saturday Night. The film is a frenetic and amazing recreation of this important night in entertainment history. For a while, I was wondering what it was really about, and then it dawned on me that it's a powerfully successful exploration of the creative process, which isn't just about how ideas come to pass, but also is about managing people. And I think many of us can confirm that managing creative people is a unique challenge. Sensitive egos are brought to the fore because creative people are in a place of vulnerability. They are putting themselves out there, giving pieces of themselves in order to entertain the general public. It's another masterful achievement from Jason Reitman as a director who also made my top 10 from 2021 for Ghostbusters Afterlife. The attention to detail, the balance of characters in spite of their great number, the storytelling, the scene work, the mise-en-scène, the energy, the tone, the flair for comic timing, the overall strength of the varied performance. It's got it all from a directorial point of view. My only real quibble is that the script doesn't really allow for character moments, breaths of processing. Story-wise, it might have been nice to have gone on Lauren's journey with him instead of just witnessing it from afar, recounting the events. That doesn't take away from the overall entertaining, inspirational impact of a story many of us knew, but still got a lot of pleasure from seeing it reenacted. Funny, smart, and exciting. We've all talked about it a little bit. Saturday night, Joey, anything you'd like to add?
I'm just so sad that it was my number 11. You know, we were nickel boys. We were nickel boys away from having a trifecta. It's a great movie.
Angelo, is your number 9? Any further thoughts?
Well, I think the first the two overlaps are movies that take place within not even a day, a couple hours. That's the next movie we should make.
The debut of Laverne and Shirley. Is there something? And that's the best I can do as far as segueing to our number 4 film of 2024. All right, Joe, it's time for your number 4 film of 2024.
My number 4 film, Sing Sing. Good story. Coleman Domingo, maybe over the top. It's very actory. I liked it. I liked Clarence Macklin. I really was taken by his performance. You know, I was really enthralled by the story.
There is a lot to love about this film. The nobility and the celebration of art, rehabilitation and second chances. Some of the inmates are quite good, luckily the one with larger roles. But as with anything that risks working with non-professionals, there are characters that feel less real. Given their backstory, their abilities are exceptional, but that's grading on a curve. And we can't grade the whole film on that same curve. It's a film released theatrically, and thus it needs to be evaluated like any other. The story itself is less interesting than the idea of it. Its emotion is raw and pure and powerful, which mostly makes up for the derivative nature of the narrative. Coleman Domingo has some nice moments, but I really like the word that Joey used, actory. This film doesn't seem like a huge challenge for him. He likely spent most of his energy, meeting the inmates on their own level, and from that perspective, I guess it's an accomplishment. I admit it did seem self-aware of the importance of its mission, and in that sense, it went for the heartstrings in areas where it wasn't always warranted, instead of just relying on the characters and story to deliver that. The filmmaking itself was sadly lame, a little manipulative at times, or perhaps somewhere along the way they realized they didn't have the talent across the board to make that work in every scene, so they needed to up their game from the filmmaking point of view. But within the fabric of the film, you can see the wide gap between the major benefits and the awkward missteps that come with an experiment of this kind. I like the idea of it. It did wind up as my 14th favorite film of 2024 because it does have a lot of raw emotion. The amateurishness of it brought it down for me. Angelo, Sing Sing.
I agree with everything you guys said. I didn't think Coleman Domingo was as actory as you thought, but then maybe because I thought it is, he is in this technically theater environment. I like the film a lot.
So, Angelo, what's your number 4 film of 2024?
My number 4 film is Honora by Sean Baker. I just thought it was a great film. What I liked about it was where it went. I felt it was a great ride. Like sometimes Mikey Madison, like her accent would, to me, kind of was like grating, but I think it's because it's just the characters from that she had to go there. I liked the road trippy turn it took. Yeah, it hit me at the end.
I kind of get what the appeal is, at least to the critics. I've been a long proponent of Sean Baker's work. We did a whole show in the Florida Project a couple years ago. Film is an alchemy of styles fused together. But it's also, in doing so, it's a merging of tropes in a way that's ultimately derivative, at least to me. The story gets really silly in a knowing way, but it loses me, perhaps just when others are getting entertained. One of the things I've loved so much about Baker's work in the past is the deeper imperative truths that he uncovers beneath some of the quirkiness, and I did not feel that here. Oddly enough, it feels like the film is at its closest to standard Hollywood storytelling, both in terms of script structure and shot choices. And acting. He actually seems to use a full cast of trained actors, which is far from his usual. But it is also his most hollow work. I suppose you can make the argument about how it acknowledges the advantages of the wealthy, 1% have over the rest of us, playing with our lives in many ways for their own amusement. But not only is that hardly revelatory, it's not even that interesting. And these characters are so extreme that it kind of nullifies the point. If there were moments of nuance or layers, maybe it might have worked, but not so much to me. I liked Mikey Madison's performance more than I liked Yuri Borisov. I still admire Baker as a filmmaker. Historically, the freedom he advocates creates some magic moments, but not only is that less true here, the entire film feels on rails. Part of the joy of Baker has been earned surprises, but it's just not here. There's nothing to root for and very little to laugh at. This very possible Best Picture winner landed with a thud in spite of its acclaim. For me, Joey and Nora.
Things that I liked about it were vibes, but I have a lot of negative things to say about it, and mostly characters. There's so much gratuitous sex for a long time, and it's like funny, and then it's just like, all right, this is excessive. And then Yuri Borisov, I felt like every time he said something, it should have been like a zoom in and him like a face to the camera and like a sound effect. His character felt completely unbelievable to me. Couldn't believe that was a real a real person.
I do feel like his choices were not that grounded. He was trying to do less is more, but it was just less. Like I felt like wasn't much going on there.
Like, oh, it's my birthday.
Doing impressions now, ladies and gentlemen, I guess. It's like a modern screwball comedy with like an edgy twist. Like I get what he's trying to do. It did not fuse together for me in a way I enjoyed. Angelo, rebuttal.
I had no expectations, and it kind of took me on a journey I wasn't expecting.
So it's time for my number 4, guys, whether you like it or not. Last year, I only had one Best Picture nominee on my top 10, all the way back at number 8. This year, my number 4 is the only Best Picture nominee on this list, and it is the first time where 2 films in a franchise both made my top 10 in their respective years. Of course, 3 years ago, Dune Part 1 made all 3 of our top 10 lists, falling at number 2 for me. And here we have the next installment at my number 4, which did not disappoint. Just as in the first one, it's kind of hard to evaluate the film separately because more than most sequels, they feel so interconnected. But it has to be acknowledged that to me, this film is everything I could have hoped for and more, fulfilling on the promise of the first one, which in hindsight feels like more of an appetizer for this hearty main course. It avoids the traps of many sci-fi or action films in that it doesn't succumb to cheap cleverness or contrived humor. Everything makes sense within the world that Villeneuve spent 2 films cultivating and explaining. The script, once again, is extremely impressive in how it balances all the storylines and politics, but more importantly, that it manages to successfully hold up a mirror to our current world in the way that the best sci-fi does. The juxtaposition of global politics and fundamentalist religion is effective, compelling, without ever feeling heavy-handed. The cloud that hangs over all the thematic exploration is the civilization's reliance on a single resource, which makes one wonder what can be done in our own world to mitigate that. Obviously, the film looks stunning and the visual effects are next level realistic. Villeneuve is ultimately a stylist, so it's surprising that his films appeal to me so much since I generally am not, and I mostly drift towards more grounded direction, the scene work, etc. However, for all the visual beauty and careful designs, the scenes don't lack for anything. The extremity of the situation eschews the normal, quiet moments that I sometimes think are essential details. The shot choices and edit never seem to lose track of the larger goals, both in terms of story and themes. Dune is a time capsule kind of book. And finally, we have a movie that lives up to that legacy. I got Dune Part 2 here, Angelo.
Dune Part 2 barely missed my top 10. I liked it a lot, too. I thought it was better than Dune Part 1 for all the reasons you said. Austin Butler killed it, man.
Angelo, so that begs the question, what kept it off your list?
I think it was just the other films.
Power of comparison. Joey, Dune Part 2.
I agree. I loved Dune. It didn't make my top 10, but it also just barely missed it. It's in the teens. I'll say that. A solid movie-going experience also.
So no rebuttal for me. That seems to work, which means we have arrived, ladies and gentlemen, at our top 3 films of 2024. Angelo.
All right, I'm going to wait for your rebuttal to mine. It is Wicked. I wanted it to be good, and it was. The music came out of the screen for me. It was fun. It was emotional. Like, Ariana Grande killed it. I was shocked. I love the energy of it. The costume design, the production design. It was more than what I was hoping it would be.
Sometimes we make predictions on these shows. Oh, Angelo, I don't think you're going to like this. Joey, I don't think you're going to like that, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, Angelo is correct. I just do not like Wicked. But I honestly had some issues with the stage show, which I did see on Broadway. I had problems with it then, and those problems were not improved upon. I disagree with you wholeheartedly in that the main issue for me in the film is how bad Ariana Grande is.
What?
Yeah. She has no place in a movie.
Jonathan.
She is terrible. From a directorial point of view, I realized something about John Chu. He is a maker of moments, but is not a comprehensive storyteller. And as such, the film sort of plays almost like a jukebox musical, a collection of greatest hits with a lot of filler in between. The source material by Gregory Maguire has an incredible amount of depth. Some of those moments are present here in practice, but they fail to capture any comportment, defying gravitas, if you will. See what I did there, Angelo? I thought you'd appreciate that. Perhaps the most damaging aspect to the film is the desperate and successful appeal to the youth market by casting Ariana Grande. She has the Disney Channel comic timing, but that doesn't quite play across the depth of her counterpart. To make matters worse, no amount of green makeup can disguise the age difference between the 2 leads, making their crucial connection harder to swallow. Cynthia Erivo is truly wonderful from an acting point of view. I acknowledge the extraordinary design and use of color, but in fairness, the template for that was set by the outstanding Broadway designers, and too much deviation from that might have alienated the core audience. Chu has a tendency to overuse and be over-reliant on digital effects, which can take one out of the experience, and that is apparent once again. Most notable in the Dancing Through Life number, which was well on its way to being a high point in the film when it was mostly practical until it wasn't. This cold heart found it entirely without bite. I really disliked my experience with Wicked. Joey.
I really enjoyed my experience with Wicked. It was another wonderful movie theater experience. I've seen the stage production and didn't have notes as you did, Jonathan. Enjoyed this movie. I thought Ariana Grande was flawless.
She's so one note, guys. Like, I can't believe you're buying that. That's kid stuff, especially in comparison to Cynthia Erivo, who's like doing like actual like grounded work. Like, sure, Ariana Grande has like the jokes, but I mean, there's nothing going on underneath from my perspective. Like, zip. Like, there's no technique in her performance at all. Angelo, it's your movie, your rebuttal.
My rebuttal, I don't know. I don't agree. I'm not familiar with her acting from her Disney days. I'm mostly familiar with her acting from her SNL skits.
I can concur that this felt like SNL sketch acting. I'll give you that. Joey's number 3.
My number 3 is Love Lies Bleeding. Another movie that I know Jonathan will hate. Vibes were high. It was a cool feeling movie. Dark. I really enjoyed Love Lies Bleeding.
The pattern here is, Joey, stylization you enjoy. You see it in The Substance, Kinds of Kindness, Nickel Boys, and I like something more grounded. For me, the stylization of Love Lies Bleeding left me cold. Everything in this movie feels false to me, and then it goes off the deep end in the third act, which I feel like I've said a lot about other movies. But it's almost like it knowingly jumped off the deep end, as if to experiment with the fusion of neo-noir and surrealism, but I'm not sure that they went together. It's kind of like putting orange juice in your cereal instead of milk. Amazingly, Kristen Stewart actually has a lot of powerful moments, but I can't say the same for her novice co-star. As a result, their newfound love winds up being too new to facilitate the plot the way it's meant to. I just don't buy it. And the rest of the cast fails to deliver. Even the great Ed Harris kind of grumbles his way through his two-dimensional character. I felt like the cinematography was weird, colorful, and accomplished, but it didn't seem to fit the film. The overheads looked cool, but felt odd in context. So again, stylization for stylization's sake. The same thing with the super wides, with the odd, possibly digitally created skylines. Lots of other bizarre choices, like the sounds of muscles and haircuts that went way too far for believability's sake. It all seems so silly in retrospect and ultimately disengaging for me. There's female empowerment here as they rebel against the patriarchy, not to mention intolerance of both homophobia and different body types. There's the cycle of abuse and even the inclusion of a storyline against performance-enhancing drugs and how the allure to make one's dreams come true could be too great not to give in to the temptation. So I don't want to suggest that the movie is shallow. It's that its execution just goes way too far for my palate and it diffuses any impact those considerations might have. It's a weird movie. At least I'll admit that it's consistently weird. So there's points for that, I suppose. Love Lies Bleeding, Angelo.
I did not watch it.
The movie did a good job of putting the viewer in a very high state of stress and anxiety. I was fully invested in just like the stress of it. You know, really anxiety-inducing movie in the best way possible.
Angelo watch it and he'll be the tiebreaker when the time comes.
I honestly can't wait to hear what you think of it, Angelo.
All right, so it's time for my number 3. Interestingly, it was Nicole Kidman in Days of Thunder who first got me thinking about control, when her poorly written doctor character elucidated that was nothing but an illusion, which for some reason has stuck with me all these years. I still think that's true about control, but not so about power. Power is something we give away to others, sometimes as a gift and sometimes as a curse. That concept has been explored in possibly far too many films, not to mention how it relates to sexual dynamics, but few do it as successfully as the film Baby Girl from director Helena Rain. It kind of reminded me of Secretary, but that film carried a smirk with it the entire time, where tonally this feels more like a self-aware, lusty glare. All in all, it's a gripping psychosexual drama centered around a dimensional, fully realized character portrait. It's not Nicole Kidman's greatest performance, but it might be her best in a long time, perhaps since her grief-stricken mother in Rabbit Hole, and it is definitely the best actress performance of 2024 for me. Her internal struggle with her presumed sexual deviancy is wonderfully nuanced. It's tremendously complex in that she knows how much she has to lose, but it wouldn't have any impact otherwise. Is it a slow descent into addiction, or is it a journey of self-awareness? Or a combination of both, and is that level of self-awareness healthy? That question of balance is at the center of the film and is beautifully addressed both in performance and script. It is also one of the more cinematic character studies of the year, using its camera angles to enhance both its questions and its answers. The shots drift with her suddenly unsteady CEO, which aids us in getting underneath her desperation emotionally. The carefully modulated soundtrack with a pulsating score/soundscape puts you right in the center of her internal tension. On one hand, it's not judgmental about her sexual preferences, and it seems to acknowledge the inexplicability of attraction and stimulation. On the flip side, we can't be held captive by our sexuality. If we acted out our every sexual desire, we'd be no better off, but we each deserve to explore our own truth to some degree, right? So again, it's about balance, and that's the gray area we often want films that get mired in. My primary quibble with the film, if any, revolves around the performances by Harris Dickinson and Antonio Banderas, who aren't able to reach the high bar set by Kidman. These are small smudges that only mildly mar this impressively filmic and insightful achievement. I've got Baby Girl as my number 3 film. Joey, Baby Girl.
I haven't seen it.
Angelo, Baby Girl.
I haven't seen it.
It is time for our number 2 film, 2024. I wonder if Joey's nervous to reveal his number 2 film.
I'm not nervous. My number 2 film of 2024 is Evil Does Not Exist. This is maybe another stylization pick. Slow moving pace drew me in. It slowed me down. The overall story of it was kind of secondary. Plot was fine. The cinematography of this movie I thought was really good. To me, what felt like a very lived-in, real film. Very thoroughly enjoyed Evil Does Not Exist.
More often than not, I like a slow burn in films. Like I like methodical pace. It takes time for processing and thought, and especially if they're showing a lot of people's faces. I often say the most cinematic thing is the expression on somebody's face. But there's no way I was going to watch this movie. I did not watch Evil Does Not Exist. I totally skipped it. Angelo, Evil Does Not Exist.
I did not watch it either.
I feel like it's an improvement on Drive My Car in a lot of ways. Each scene feels 2/3 the length while also still preserving that, like, okay, we're here now for a while. You can sit in it, but it's not like, come on, let's move.
All right, Angelo, it's time for your number 2 film of 2024.
My number 2 movie is Joey's biggest movie missed, which is Elma.
Oh!
This movie is so charming. The personal aspect is I've recently been dealing a lot with my parents who are seniors. Plus, this is a grandmother-grandson movie, and I love my grandmother when she was here. And that relationship that's not really told so much in movies. It examines old age or being an old person, being a senior, just living in the world today, and kind of turns it on its head where it's kind of an adventure road movie also. I love Thelma.
Thelma, to me, seems very self-aware of its heightened tone, but has surprising depth in spite of that. The script is tightly structured in a way that feels obvious, and will occasionally contrive things when looking for either a joke or thematic resonance. Still, it manages to be mildly entertaining and still with a lot of valuable things to communicate. The senior citizen angle is going to be obvious, as well as reflecting on the horrifying way they're being exploited by scammers on a global basis. The more interesting angle, however, involves the 20-somethings in the piece who are dismissed just as readily as their grandparents, connecting the generations in a way that I hadn't previously thought about. The rise of the helicopter parenting has created a generation of dependents who provide just as much worry and concern as their supposedly deteriorating older counterparts. It's a compelling perspective and suggests balance, as the film also makes points about the limits of independence. That extra layer helps elevate the piece to be something more than a clever idea that went on too long. I'm impressed how active June Squibb continues to be, though it feels more that the director wisely shaped her performance around her ability, which is perfect for the film, but it's definitely why I did not consider her for any year-end acting awards. The rest of the cast, however, is a little over the top for my taste. Maybe it's on tone, but it's one of the things that bothers me about the film. It has all these really interesting observations, but has moments that feel way too silly, especially with some of these tertiary characters. There are plenty of times when the film hits the humor bullseye, but there are a handful of misses too. They overshot their mark time and time again in a way that's staying with me as much as the good parts. Director Josh Margolin shows a great awareness of film in that his shot choices feel appropriately derivative. He shot the film like a Hollywood action movie, which I guess is part of the joke. I wonder if he could have incorporated a different approach before and after the mission. It might not work. It might be too much of a departure, but it's something I'm considering. It would, offer a little contrast. On one hand, I think it's really cool that it was both a little entertaining and a little meaningful. And on the other hand, I found it occasionally slight and contrived on the script point of view. Maybe that's okay in service of the greater points. There are a lot of good things about it, but a lot of imperfections as well. I see guys drinking as I say the word contrived over and over again. Angelo, rebuttal.
No, I see your points there, Jamie. So I really have no rebuttal.
He doesn't want to rebut because it's getting late in the evening. He's slowing down as we get close to number one. I'm reading between the lines here, I think. Okay, so it's time for my number two, which was actually the first 2024 film I saw in theaters all the way back in January. For all its irreverence, the Book of Clarence winds up embracing spirituality in a meaningful and impactful way. More importantly, director James Samuel seems to figure out the tonal balance that held back his admittedly fun but flawed last effort. In The Harder They Fall, which made Patrick's top 10 of 2021, Samuel turned the Western on its head. But that has been done many times before. The sword and sandals biblical epics of the 50s are a little more obscure to modern audiences, and as such, I was impressed with how knowledgeable he was about them. The intertextuality in this film is constant, but also how effectively he updated the genre to meet his own needs. The smart and fun camera work and editing match the narrative a little more in this film than his last film, more in service of the story than forcing the visuals. And it also has a great soundtrack and really notable sound design work. Lakeith Stanfield has impressed many times over the years, but also occasionally made severe missteps, kind of like Willem Dafoe, a huge hit-or-miss guy, but not because he takes such big swings as Dafoe. Still, this is a hit of performance in a dual role. He really seems to understand this guy, the confusion and self-doubt of Clarence and the blind faith of Thomas. And there's something really beautiful about how he navigates his art. The racial overtones are omnipresent without being in your face like the way many filmmakers approach it. There's a monologue in the middle that feels like the prototype of how to make a point without being overly didactic and preachy. It's a delicate balance that this script nails perfectly. But more than about race and more than about religion, it feels like this film is more about honor and compassion. There is overlap there because many religions preach love thy neighbor, but this film challenges it in a way that proves the potential of it. It's also interesting the connection the film seems to make between martyrdom and legacy. Will your deeds be your immortality, especially if you suffered for them? Is our historical impact more important than our immediate gratification and happiness, or even feeling of self-worth? Or perhaps is the knowledge of that legacy enough to add to that feeling of self-worth? I don't mean to get too high-minded over something that is ultimately a comedy, but it is a pointed one and best of all, a successful one. It is funny, but also manages to have emotional and cultural impact. And to me, that's hitting the bullseye. I've got The Book of Clarence from way back in January is my number two film of 2024. Joey.
A movie that I have started is Book of Clarence. I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far. I really like it so far, and now I have all the more reason to go back to it. It was a movie that I started today. I'm about, 45 minutes into it. I really like Lakeith Stanfield's performance in it. I usually don't like when an actor plays twins, but I don't know, it worked for me. I love him.
The question is then, why'd you stop?
I ran out of time.
He has to finish that movie. Angelo.
I have to start that movie.
We reveal our number one films of 2024, our favorite films. A very irritating screech from Joey there that I don't know what to make of. Before we get in, the number one films of the year is our tradition to go through our number one films historically. 9 different years of number one films so far, and I'm just going to rattle through them. In 2015, J Money had The Forbidden Room. Davey Joe had Creed. I had Trumbo. In 2016, J Money had Arrival. Davey had Silence, which was my number 2 of that year and made my number 10 of the decade. My number one film of that year was Christine, though I later swapped it with Silence when reevaluating for the top 10 of the decade show. 2017, Ryan's number one film was Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Devin had Call Me By Your Name, and I had The Foreigner, which also made my top 10 of the decade. In 2018, George had Black Klansman. James had Spider Into the Spider-Verse, which was also Jim's number one of that year. I had Widows, which also made my top 10 of the decade. 2019, Alex had Honey Boy, which was also my number 6 on that top 10 and made Alex's top 10 of the decade. Jim had Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I had Ad Astra. 2020, Jim had Nomadland. Devin had Sound of Metal, and I had 9 Days. In 2021, Matt Polis had The Lost Daughter. Patrick had Pig, and I had Raya and the Last Dragon. In 2022, Max had All Quiet in the Western Front. Melanie had Tar, and I had Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. And last year, 2023, Talia had American Fiction. Kelly had Anatomy of a Fall, and I had Our Father, the Devil as my number one film of 2023. So now the time has come to reveal this year's best films from our perspective, and the honor goes to Angelo to go first.
Well, I love that one of your number ones was an animated film a couple years ago. So my number one is an animated film, and it is Flow, Latvian film about a cat. There's no dialogue. I think what was the issue where, in terms of with the wild robot, where it was sort of manipulating your emotions, this kind of was a little bit more grounded in terms of how the character of the animals got together. Their innate nature in the wild robot, it seemed a little artificial towards the end. Here, the animals, they were almost believable. They also bonded despite not really understanding each other, right? Or for me, there was sort of like this kind of environmental message. The animation I thought was great, especially with the way they animated the eyes to sort of kind of give each animal their character. It was a very surprising film.
As far as Flow is concerned, it's obviously going to get a lot of mileage on the animal cuteness factor. Its greatest strength is its extremely realistic depiction of animal mannerisms, mostly avoiding any need to anthropomorphize them. That's twice on the show where I've used the word anthropomorphize. That's got to be notable on some point of view. Their relationships were charming and felt earned. The visual storytelling was masterful most of the time. I remain unclear on a couple key plot points. When you tell a story without any dialogue, like you're taking a chance there, and the last act kind of lost me. It inserted sudden apparent flights of fancy that didn't mesh with the rest of the tone and the world created. I also found a couple of elements disingenuous, like their ability to steer the boat and how long they went before eating. But mostly, I actually didn't like the animation from a visual point of view. Their attempt at texture didn't quite ring true to me. And this is sort of a next level kind of a quibble. You know, it's a style choice, which is their prerogative, but for me, it was a distraction too often to count. I expect many will read this film from an environmental perspective, but for me, it shares more in common with The Wild Robot in the ways that it uses animals to suggest the advantages, if not necessity, for more globalism as opposed to nationalism. Especially as the climate situation becomes more dire, we need countries normally thought of as enemies, similar to the way natural enemies of the animal kingdom, to come together in times of crisis, and perhaps that togetherness can last beyond that. I also think the film is about the rather banal concept of the family that you find versus the family that you're born into. However, it's the more political interpretation that I find to be more impactful. It has more relevance and urgency. So the film has a variety of successes, cinematically, thematically, and emotionally. It's only the small corners cut along the way that will prevent me from raising it to that upper echelon of animated films that I saw this year. So I actually have it as my third favorite animated film of the year, Joey, Flow.
I really enjoyed Flow. I thought the animation style was cool, but when you bring up Jonathan that it may have been distracting more times than you can count. Certain things were animated with high definition and others with less definition. Like the water always looked so real. And then a lot of other things weren't as fully rendered.
Shadows and reflections, especially, almost like a choice.
I felt a lot for the characters in this movie. And I agree that the animal mannerisms, it really was refreshing. Like you can just watch these animals be animals.
Time for Angelo's rebuttal.
I like that you brought up one of the points that I missed about choosing your own family, which seems like the characters had to do. But then they also had the courage to step away from their tribe. As an LGBT citizen, that got us through life. I didn't relegate it to each character sort of almost like representing their own country or something, but I like that you brought that up because I see it now also.
So I just want to make the point that this still exists in the world. What's on the back of this card is still in play. So it's possible that I get a prediction here correctly, because it is time for Joey to announce his number one film of 2024.
My number one film of 2024 is Dee Dee. Growing up in the MySpace era, AOL Instant Messenger era, this movie really well encapsulated that time period. The movie is mostly about growing up. It's about otherism and growing up, as an Asian American, wanting to separate themselves from being an Asian American and trying to insert themselves into a chosen family, a chosen culture amongst their high school crew. It was an emotional movie. Performances were good. The vibes were good. So I really enjoyed Dee Dee.
First things first here is we got to see if I got it right. But given your animal proclivities, which is maybe a weird sentence out of context, I kind of thought you would appreciate one of the best dog movies I've seen in a long time. That did not make the top 10. But this was what I predicted you were going to pick, given your background with the dogs in particular. Now we're going to have the come to Jesus discussion here when it comes to Dee Dee.
No.
Yeah, no. I mean, this is what I consider to be one of the worst films that I saw this year, simply because of how derivative and trite it was. Like, I was at a point at this movie where I was rolling my eyes constantly. In terms of capturing the era, forced everything within the mise-en-scène. Like, it feels like it wasn't really how people decorated their rooms, but they needed to get enough stuff in there that referenced the time. Unnaturally done. Even like with the way they speak, which didn't feel natural. The characters, I disagree with you about the performances. I thought everybody was really not very believable. I found the whole thing to be trite. Been there, I've done that, and nothing felt earned. Like, even the emotions were forced, because the way the script and the actions went felt like it was about where other coming-of-age movies have gone.
I'm glad this is your number one. I didn't hate it as much as Jonathan, but I wanted more. There was something lacking about it. I like sort of how it that was the era.
Don't pretend you're from that era. Don't pretend you're from
me and Angelo and me.
I love the truth of the sibling rivalry and how it evolves. For me, there was something missing, and I couldn't figure it out yet.
You talked about the way that relationship evolved. It didn't earn that evolution. A surface kind of the way they changed their relationship to each other, both in terms of performance and script. It didn't earn that arc. It's all sort of like lip service. It felt like someone copying something instead of revealing their true self. It wasn't grounded at all, and it feels like it could have been or should have been. That's where these movies take off, these coming-of-age movies. It's just tropes upon tropes is what I saw. Joey, your rebuttal.
I think this movie was so grounded.
We definitely disagree on the grounded aspect of it. It definitely felt false to me. I do think it is interesting that all three of our number one films have titles that are one words, and they all are 4 letters long.
Oh, no way, dude.
The filmmaker behind my number one film also made my top 10 list of 1988, 1994, and 2018.
Oh my God.
That 1994 film was actually the one I named the best of that year, though obviously that predated this particular show. He also has several films on my top 100 of all time, and I will have to consider this return to form as a possible add to that list at some point. The apparent experiment that was here turns out to be a resounding success, a masterpiece of framing, obviously, but also of design, editing, music, and blocking. It's not the first time a movie tries to be about everything, and often those films sink under the weight of their own ambitions. And this one actually succeeds on many levels to my mind. Its approach towards existentialism feels more about universality and commonalities, the things that we all share: life, death, love, heartbreak, dreams, and taxes. There is an editing gimmick that is distracting at first, but once you get into its rhythm, it allows for numbingly beautiful juxtapositions that highlight this. In a way, too, it's also about our connection to place in our time here on Earth, something that perhaps we sometimes take for granted. By extension, we can then arrive at some idea of the importance of environment, of shaping our respective identities. It's about what or who home is to each of us, and the importance of having that grounding spot. Alan Silvestri's score does a lot of heavy lifting in the piece. It's melodically subtle, but it also is the stitches that holds the fabric of these seemingly disparate stories together. I love so many of Zemeckis' early films, but I continue to be impressed how he's challenged himself as an artist, notably the way performances have flourished in a lot of his recent efforts. Robin Wright has the film's most powerful moments. Margaret's journey is carefully navigated and explored by Wright, who's become one of our most reliable actors. I've often said that with the passing of William Goldman, Eric Roth is our greatest living screenwriter. And here, in collaboration with Zemeckis, he doesn't need to pull off the magic trick he normally does of making dense information entertaining and cinematic. The scenes are simple, but always honest and painstakingly real. The illusions and echoes of Forrest Gump are everywhere, intended or not. This reunion of collaborators 30 years later, with its extreme concept, could have gone sideways very easily. These mature artists and artisans walk the tightrope with amazing precision without losing their sense of compassion in the process. I've got here, Joey had a inexplicable, visceral, angry reaction on the bottom of my screen here, so I'm going to wait to go to him. Angelo, here.
You know what, Jamie, maybe I want to recut the beginning, but actually, I was going to say here would have been my biggest movie missed. Because, yeah, it was on my list for the longest time, and I just didn't I didn't catch it.
I feel like you said that 2 or 3 times tonight. I'm going to change my biggest movie miss. Joey, here.
I liked Here. I mean, honestly, I thought it was really cool. Like Robert Zemeckis knows how to pull your heartstrings. It's not so heavy-handed that it takes me out of the movie. I wasn't, sobbing uncontrollably watching Here, but I was emotionally invested.
But it's interesting too, because of how much you appreciate stylization. There is stylization here.
Yeah.
Like it is, and it could have been gimmicky, but it earns the gimmick. Almost like the inverse to me of Nickel Boys, in the sense that, what it discovered through this gimmickry, it was something larger, something comprehensive. Everyone seems to love this section where we reveal our least favorite films of the year. Last year, Kelly's worst film of 2023 was actually on Talia's top 10 list. That had happened once before when Jim's worst film of 2019 was actually my number 1 film of 2019. And you think Joey and I are far apart. That's the widest gap you could possibly have. It seems unlikely it would happen again, but it's happened twice, so we'll see. I'm going to let Joey go first. It's going to be a film that I loved, I'm sure. Joey, what was your least favorite film of 2020?
I don't think... Oh, God, I could have checked the spreadsheet to see if you've seen it. Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell is my least favorite movie of 2024. It felt like a chore getting through this movie. I love slow movies, and this is a slow movie, but it just felt like it was trying to punish the viewer. It did. It felt like torture. I got through it, didn't understand why it had to be so long.
So you stopped watching The Book of Clarence, but you got all the way through Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell.
It's very different days.
I did see the film. It's a Vietnamese film, for those of you who don't know. It has a lot of long takes that are a useful and elegant tool in our arsenal as filmmakers, but it's rarely meant to work exclusively. There's a time and place, and in this case, the choice to make this film a series of very extensive long takes boxed in the filmmaker to such a degree that the thrust of the narrative became ultimately irrelevant. It was image making instead of storytelling, which is fine, I suppose. It has its place, but the images were not in service of the story, and thus were kind of unanastic. I appreciated the skill that it required to get that footage. Long takes are the hardest to pull off, which is why they're so rare. A lot of it was very beautiful. I did not enjoy it, and it is very difficult to get through. I appreciated the skill, which is why it's not going to be my worst film of the year. Angelo, did you see Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell?
No, I did not.
It sounds like I'm mostly agreeing with you. I'm just giving them some credit for the long takes.
Yeah.
Okay, Angelo, what is your worst film of 2024?
My worst film of 2024 is Argyle. I thought it was just a mess of a movie. But I was hoping for a good, fun movie, and it just wasn't.
I liked Argyle.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And my first note in here is the audience gave up on this one too early, but I was appreciating it a bit. However, it went off a cliff in the final act. Too much Deus Ex Machina to be tolerated. And perhaps more importantly, the beauty of the 2 of the 3 Kingsman movies is that they, in spite of their heightened world, hint at global humanistic truths buried in the silliness. This is pretty much just silliness. I acknowledge that. But it's mostly well-crafted silliness. It's often very funny. I found it smart, visually inventive, with some great music throughout. There's some excellent editing as well. I also liked all the actors. I think Bryce Dallas Howard was really strong. I think Sam Rockwell was really good. I don't mind the tone. I don't mind the silliness because it's extremely consistent and strangely works within the worlds of Vaughn's other films, as if an offshoot of the Kingsman films. Like, this was a fun movie-going experience for me. It ultimately was a letdown because it didn't attempt that next level. It has a lot going for it, but the screenplay issues combined with the ultimate hollowness is probably why audiences aren't responding, but there's a lot of things that I did like about Argyle. Joey?
I didn't see Argyle, and I can't say I want to see it.
Angelo ruined it for you. All right, some disagreement there, but I guess that's on par for the evening. Let's see it's my turn for worst film of the year. So it's amazing to me that my worst film of 2024 is going to come from one of the world's indisputable cinema maestros. I have 2 theories about why Almodovar's The Room Next Door went so awry. One is that Almodovar has been obsessed with death since his own health scares, and that has clouded his judgment. The second is that he still wasn't quite ready for a transition to English language. Only a select few are. This film feels like it was written by a 12-year-old with an encyclopedia. In spite of all the forced literary references, it's so on the nose and blunt in a way that's incredibly condescending and most certainly not entertaining or interesting to me. It features 2 of the world's greatest actresses who are saddled with some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard. Its attitude towards the right to die is obvious, but like his countrymen in the film The Sea Inside, he goes to great lengths to preach to you the reason why. The design was ostentatious, the music was elitist, and cinematography was uninspired at best. I can't think of a single positive thing to say about the excruciating experience that was The Room Next Door. Angelo.
My experience with this was high because I saw this in Barcelona. I finally get to watch an Almodovar film in Spain, and it's in English. I agree. It's just, I felt like I almost didn't really care. Maybe his films don't translate well in English.
Joey, The Room Next Door.
Didn't see it.
All right, I'm going to wrap things up, guys. That's it for tonight, but join us tomorrow night for our pilgrimage back in time to 1974. We'll discuss the films and Oscar races of that year and the biggest show we do all year, the Classic Year in Review, 1974 in Review. We hope to see you there. We're very excited about it. You guys, say goodbye to the audience.
Goodbye.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.